What you call strength might be the very thing keeping you weak. The routines you built to save yourself, they're slowly becoming your cage. You wake up, you perform, you check the boxes, and somewhere beneath all that control, something inside you is dying. Not dramatically, quietly, like a river that stopped flowing but hasn't dried up yet. Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. The discipline that's destroying you is the same one that could set you free. It sounds impossible, contradictory even. But Eastern philosophy and the psychology of pain have known this for centuries, that the sword that wounds is also the sword that heals, that suffering and awakening aren't opposites, they're neighbors. This video isn't about working harder or finding balance or any of that surface-level advice you've already tried. This is about what happens when willpower dies. When the self you've been building brick by disciplined brick finally collapses. And why that collapse might be the most honest thing that's ever happened to you. You're not broken, you're breaking open. And it's about time. He thought discipline was armor, something he could wear every morning like a soldier preparing for battle. Wake up at 5, cold showers, strict routines, each habit stacked like bricks in a wall meant to keep chaos out. But here's what Eastern philosophy whispers that self-help gurus won't tell you. The sword you sharpen against the world eventually turns inward. The discipline that destroys you is the same one that sets you free. It sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? How can something so structured, so controlled, become the very thing that breaks you? The answer lives in the space between effort and effortlessness, between doing and being. The body continues. That's the strange part. He still goes through the motions. Gym at dawn, emails answered, meals prepped with precision. From the outside, nothing's changed. But inside, the self has already died. It's like watching a river that's frozen on the surface while the current beneath has stopped moving entirely. This is where the psychology of pain meets spiritual transformation in its rawest form. The ego thinks it's winning because the schedule hasn't collapsed yet. But ego dissolution doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It whispers through exhaustion, through the hollow feeling behind every completed task. Shadow work begins here, though he doesn't recognize it yet. There's a voice, quiet, almost apologetic, asking dangerous questions. What if you stopped? What would be left? The mind recoils. Because to stop means to face the void, and the void holds everything we've been running from. Suffering and awakening share the same address, separated only by a door we're terrified to open.
He's built his entire identity on control, on the illusion that willpower can override emotional pain. But Buddhism teaches what trauma healing confirms. Control is just another word for fear, and fear, when pressed hard enough, becomes its own kind of prison. The phrase itself is a koan worthy of Zen philosophy. The discipline that destroys you is the same one that sets you free. It's not metaphorical, it's mechanical.
Think of a muscle torn during training. The destruction is what creates space for new growth. But here's where most people get lost. They think the answer is more discipline, harder effort, tighter control. They double down. They white-knuckle through the pain until something inside them shatters. This isn't resilience. This is resistance wearing a mask. And resistance, as any meditation practitioner knows, only amplifies what we're trying to escape. So he stands at the edge of his own collapse, still holding the sword, still pretending he's the master of his fate. The mind-body connection is screaming now, tension in the jaw, tightness in the chest, a fatigue that sleep doesn't touch. These aren't symptoms, they're messages. The temple is speaking, but he's too busy maintaining the routine to listen. Impermanence is doing its work, whether he acknowledges it or not. The structure he's built, brick by disciplined brick, is beginning to tremble. Not because it's weak, but because it was never meant to be permanent. And somewhere beneath the surface, Something ancient and patient is waiting for him to finally stop fighting and start listening. After the initial shock, something shifts. The collapse wasn't the end, it was the invitation. But invitations to self-awareness don't arrive wrapped in gold paper. They come disguised as weariness, as the quiet erosion of things you once believed made you strong. He begins to feel it now, the weight. Not the weight of responsibility or external pressure, but something far more intimate. The weight of betraying yourself every day. It's the kind of burden that doesn't show up on scales or in mirror reflections. It lives deeper, in the space between what you do and who you actually are. Eastern philosophy has a name for this: samsara, the cycle of suffering born from attachment to false identities. He's been attached to the image of the disciplined man, the one who never breaks, never questions, never rests. But what happens when the image starts cracking? The viewer now recognizes themselves, and that recognition is both relief and terror. Relief because finally someone is naming the unnamed ache. Terror because naming it means you can no longer pretend it doesn't exist. This is where emotional pain stops being abstract and becomes visceral. It's the feeling of waking up and immediately wanting to go back to sleep. Not because you're tired, but because consciousness itself has become exhausting. The contrast with the previous section sharpens everything. Before, there was still movement, still the illusion of progress. Now there's only repetition. Same alarm, same routine, same performance of a self that feels increasingly hollow. You want to be free, but you are a slave to your own mechanics. The phrase cuts because it's true. Freedom isn't something you earn through more discipline. It's what emerges when you stop performing for the invisible audience in your head. But how do you stop a machine that's been running for years? How do you tell your nervous system that the war is over when every cell has been trained for battle? Consider this. A man spends 10 years building a career he thought he wanted. He follows all the rules, checks all the boxes, climbs the ladder with precision. Then one morning, sitting in his corner office with the view he once dreamed about, he feels nothing. Or worse, he feels like an imposter in his own life. That's not failure. That's karma and rebirth happening in real time, within a single lifetime. The old self is dying, but he's still carrying its corpse around, pretending it's alive. Mindfulness would suggest observing this without judgment. But observation alone isn't enough when you've been betraying your own truth for so long. You need something stronger. You need the kind of honesty that destroys before it rebuilds. The body knows before the mind admits it. There's a tightness that won't release, a fatigue that coffee can't touch, an irritability that has nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with accumulation. This is trauma healing trying to begin, but the door is still locked from the inside. Buddhism speaks of dukkha, the fundamental unsatisfactoriness woven into existence. But it's not existence itself that's unsatisfying. It's the gap between what is and what you're pretending to be. Every morning you put on the mask. Every night you take it off, exhausted from holding your face in place. And somewhere in the silence between sleep and waking, a question forms that won't stay quiet much longer. The public now understands the enemy. But here's the twist. The enemy isn't out there. It never was. It's the part of him that's been narrating the story all along, the voice that says, "I've got this," even when everything is falling apart. The ego. Not ego in the way pop psychology throws the word around like it's simply arrogance or selfishness. No, this is deeper. This is the psychological structure that believes it can think its way out of feeling, that treats every emotion like a problem to be solved, rather than a message to be received. The public now understands. Their own ego rationalization is what prevents spiritual transformation from ever taking root. It shows that the desire to control is what prevents transformation. And here's where Wu Wei, The Taoist concept of effortless flow becomes not just philosophy, but survival instruction. The ego grips tighter when it feels threatened. It creates narratives, builds defenses, finds new ways to maintain the illusion of mastery. You are not free. You are a hostage of choice. Lands like a blade because it reveals the cruel joke. All those decisions, all that agency you thought you had, were just the ego keeping you busy enough to avoid the real work. The real work isn't doing more. It's letting go of the need to do at all. The tone here is provocative, almost spiritual, because this is the moment when things get dangerous. Not physically dangerous, psychologically dangerous.
The ego will fight for its survival with everything it has. It will convince you that surrender equals weakness, that non-attachment means not caring, that detachment is the same as disconnection. But Zen philosophy knows better. The sword that cuts is also the sword that liberates. A samurai doesn't control the blade through force. He becomes one with its movement. The moment you try to control the flow, you've already lost to it.
The moment you release control, you find yourself carried by something far more intelligent than your planning mind ever was. Think about the person who says, "I'm fine," while their hands shake, who insists they don't need help while their world crumbles silently behind closed doors. That's not strength. That's the ego performing strength because it's terrified of what vulnerability might reveal. Shadow work demands we look at these performances without flinching. It asks, what are you so afraid will be exposed if you stop pretending? The answer usually lives in childhood, in some moment when being real meant being rejected, when showing weakness invited punishment. So the armor went on, and it never came off, until now, until the weight of wearing it becomes heavier than the fear of being seen without it. Internal conflict is the mechanism here, capturing attention through psychological confrontation. He's at war with himself, and both sides are losing. One part screams for rest, for authenticity, for the courage to simply be. The other part tightens its grip, lists all the reasons why control is necessary, why discipline must not waver, why surrender would mean total collapse. But what if collapse is the point? What if enlightenment through pain isn't about transcending the breaking? It's about breaking so completely that you can finally be reassembled without the lies. The Taoists call it returning to the uncarved block. The psychologists call it ego death. Same destination, different maps. And he's standing at the crossroads, still clutching the old map, still refusing to admit it's been leading him in circles. Now comes the part most people avoid their entire lives. The encounter, not with external demons or circumstantial hardships, but with the shadow, that collection of rejected parts, buried emotions, and truths too uncomfortable to acknowledge. Carl Jung spent decades mapping this territory, and what he found wasn't comforting. The shadow doesn't go away when you ignore it. It calcifies. It turns to stone inside you, weight you carry without knowing why you're so heavy. The fear of turning to stone isn't metaphorical. It's the fear of becoming rigid, unreachable, emotionally fossilized. It's waking up one day and realizing you can't feel anything anymore. Not joy, not sorrow, not even anger. Just numbness. Eastern philosophy meets depth psychology here in a way that's almost surgical. Buddhism speaks of the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain that life brings. The second is the suffering we add by resisting it. He's been shooting himself with second arrows for years, each one adding another layer of stone around his heart. Meditation and suffering aren't opposites, they're dance partners. To sit with yourself, truly sit, is to feel everything you've been running from. The temple within has become a tomb, and he's both the prisoner and the guard. Shadow work isn't gentle. It doesn't ask permission. It waits until the defenses are weak. Then it floods in like water through cracks in a dam. There's a story worth telling here. A woman once spent 20 years in a marriage where she played the role of the happy wife. She smiled at parties, kept the house perfect, never complained. Inside, she was screaming. But she'd learned early that her real feelings made people uncomfortable. So she buried them so deep she forgot where they were. Then one day, her husband touched her shoulder and she flinched. Not from fear of him, but from fear of her own reaction. That flinch was the shadow knocking. That flinch was stone beginning to crack. Trauma healing doesn't start when you decide to heal. It starts when your body refuses to carry the lie anymore. The mind-body connection becomes impossible to ignore now. Physical symptoms with no medical explanation. Chronic tension. Mysterious pains that migrate. The body is speaking the language the mind refuses to learn. In Taoism, this is understood as blocked qi, energy that can't flow because the channels are clogged with unprocessed emotion. In modern psychology, it's called somatic experiencing. Same truth, different vocabulary. The temple is crying out, but he's still trying to silence it with more control, more discipline, more stone. What he doesn't understand yet is that impermanence applies to defenses too. Nothing stays buried forever. The shadow always finds its way to the surface. And here's where it gets interesting. The fear of turning to stone is actually the fear of staying exactly as you are. Because stone is safe. Stone doesn't feel. Stone doesn't risk. Stone survives, but never lives. Part of him knows that encountering the shadow means everything changes. There's no going back to comfortable numbness once you've seen what you've been hiding from yourself. Non-attachment, the kind Buddhism teaches, sounds beautiful in theory, but in practice it means on the identity you've spent decades constructing. It means looking at your own cruelty, your own cowardice, your own capacity for self-deception. And then, this is the hardest part, it means holding all of that with compassion instead of judgment. The stone is beginning to crack, and something alive underneath is starting to breathe. Here comes the first emotional relief. After the storm, after the breaking, after the relentless work of facing what was hidden. Silence. Not the silence of avoidance or numbness, but the silence that arrives when the inner war finally stops. The audience senses that the inner chaos is beginning to subside. It's not that the problems disappeared or that life suddenly became simple. It's that something inside him stopped arguing with reality, stopped negotiating with truth, stopped trying to think his way out of what can only be felt through. This is the peace of not having to choose, not because choice doesn't matter, but because the compulsion to control every outcome finally loosens its grip. Eastern philosophy calls this state different names. The Taoists speak of Pu, the uncarved block, the natural state before society carved you into something useful. Zen practitioners know it as Mushin, no mind, the space where thought doesn't dominate experience. But you don't need ancient terminology to recognize it. You've felt glimpses of it. Maybe watching a sunset without photographing it. Maybe in those 3 seconds after waking before memory tells you who you're supposed to be. The sound, the breath, the slow pace of time. When you stop filling every silence with noise, with planning, with the exhausting work of being someone, something else emerges. Something that was always there, just buried under layers of effort. The mind-body connection that was screaming through tension begins to soften. Not because he's fixed anything, but because he's stopped treating his own experience as an enemy. Meditation and suffering taught him this. The pain isn't the problem. The commentary about the pain is. You tell about your exhaustion is more exhausting than the exhaustion itself. Wu Wei becomes less concept and more lived reality. He still moves through his day, still has responsibilities, still faces challenges. But there's a quality shift, like the difference between swimming against a current and finally turning to flow with it. Same water, different relationship. Think about the person who spent years in therapy trying to figure out why they felt broken, cycling through diagnoses and treatments and self-help books. Then one day they're sitting in their garden, watching ants carry crumbs, and something just releases. Not because they found the answer, because they stopped needing one. That's not giving up. That's spiritual transformation through surrender. Impermanence stops being a threat and becomes a relief. Of course, this feeling won't last. Of course, tomorrow will bring new challenges. But right now there's just breath, just presence, just the bizarre miracle of being alive without needing it to mean something profound. Emotional reward arrives here, needed after 3 to 4 minutes of stress, of confrontation, of relentless honesty. Shadow work has done its excavation. Self-awareness has shown him what was hiding. Now comes integration of a different kind, the integration of simply being without constantly becoming. Non-attachment reveals its gift. You can care deeply without clinging desperately. You can have discipline without it being a leash. You can choose without every choice carrying the weight of your entire identity. The silence isn't empty. It's full of the texture of actual life instead of the narrative about life. The temple within isn't rebuilt yet. Maybe it never will be, not completely. But for the first time, he's okay with that. For the first time, the peace of not having to choose, of not having to fix, of not having to perform. It's enough, more than enough. It's everything he was reaching for through all that striving. And it was here the whole time, waiting in the space between thoughts, in the gap between breaths, in the silence that only arrives when you finally stop talking. There's a moment in every true transformation where something inside just stops. Not stops fighting, stops pretending. The mirror breaks, and for the first time, maybe ever, he sees clearly. Not the image he's been projecting, not the story he's been telling himself, but the actual shape of his own suffering. This is Satori in Zen philosophy. Sudden awakening that arrives not through accumulation, but through subtraction. Not adding more understanding, but removing the layers of illusion that prevented understanding from being obvious all along. The discipline that destroyed him, it wasn't wrong. It was incomplete. It was trying to build a house on a foundation that was never examined. Enlightenment through pain isn't about the pain being noble or redemptive. It's about pain being honest. Everything else, the routines, the control, the performance, those were lies of omission. Not malicious lies, just incomplete truths. He was disciplined, yes. But disciplined toward what? Toward an image of strength that required weakness to be exiled. Toward a version of success that demanded authenticity be sacrificed. Suffering and awakening share the same coordinates, because suffering is what happens when you're living at odds with your own nature, and awakening is just the relief of finally stopping the war with yourself. Here's what breaks through. He realizes the exhaustion wasn't from doing too much. It was from doing the wrong things for the right reasons, or maybe the right things for the wrong reasons. Either way, misalignment. The Taoists have a concept called Ti, often translated as virtue, but really meaning something closer to the power of being exactly what you are. A river doesn't try to be a river, it just flows. A mountain doesn't effort into being a mountain, it simply is. Humans are the only creatures who spend their lives pretending to be something other than what they are, then wonder why existence feels like carrying stones uphill. Wu Wei, effortless action, isn't laziness. It's what emerges when you stop forcing yourself into shapes that don't fit. Consider the moment when someone finally admits they hate their career, or that their relationship died years ago but they've been attending its funeral in slow motion. There's terror in that admission, but underneath the terror, relief so profound it feels like breathing for the first time. Self-awareness isn't comfortable. It's clarifying. And clarity, once it arrives, doesn't let you go back to comfortable delusions, the mind-body connection that was screaming through symptoms. It quiets. Not because the problems are solved, but because the split between what he knows and what he admits finally closes. Inner stillness isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. The insight isn't a destination, it's a doorway. He sees now that karma and rebirth aren't just mystical concepts, they're mechanical. Every action rooted in fear creates more fear. Every choice made from the false self strengthens the false self. He's been reincarnating into the same suffering every single day, dying to his real nature each morning and being reborn into performance. But the cycle can break, not through more discipline, through seeing. Through the kind of meditation that isn't about emptying the mind, but about being honest with what the mind contains. The mirror is broken, the pieces are scattered, and in the fragments, he can finally see what was always there. Not the perfect reflection he wanted, but the real face he needed to meet. Something is shifting, something that can't be controlled or scheduled or disciplined into being. Something that only arrives when you finally stop trying to arrive. So now what? The inside arrived, the mirror shattered, clarity cut through years of fog. But clarity alone doesn't build a life. This is where most spiritual teachings stop, right at the moment of awakening, as if seeing the truth automatically transforms everything. It doesn't. Integration is the unglamorous work that comes after revelation. It's taking the pieces of the broken mirror and deciding which ones to keep, which ones to release, and how to arrange what remains into something that can actually hold your reflection without lying. Spiritual transformation without integration is just another form of escapism, another way to avoid the messy work of actually living differently. The foundation that crumbled wasn't entirely wrong. It was built on soil that was never examined. He had discipline, yes. Structure, yes. But all of it constructed on assumptions he inherited rather than chose. Now comes the difficult part. Rebuilding from the ruins while keeping what was genuine and releasing what was performance. Buddhism teaches the middle way. Not the rigid extreme of harsh discipline, not the collapse into chaos, but the path that honors both structure and flow. Wu Wei doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting from alignment rather than from fear. It means discipline that serves your nature rather than suffocates it. Think of it like this. A man learns to play piano through strict classical training. Hours of scales, rigid technique, no deviation from the sheet music. He becomes technically perfect, but musically dead. Then something breaks, maybe burnout, maybe rebellion, and he stops playing entirely. That's the collapse. But integration? Integration is when he returns to the piano and discovers he can honor the technique while allowing improvisation. He can use the structure as a foundation for freedom rather than a cage for control. That's what he's learning now. The discipline that destroyed him is the same one that sets him free, but only when it's rebuilt with self-awareness instead of self-abandonment. Shadow work continues here, not as confrontation, but as conversation. The rejected parts don't disappear once acknowledged. They need to be integrated, given a seat at the table, allowed to inform decisions without controlling them. His anger? It was always there, just pressed down until it became depression. His vulnerability? Still terrifying, but now he understands it's the doorway to actual intimacy rather than performed connection. Trauma healing isn't linear. Some days he'll wake up and feel solid, aligned, clear. Other days the old patterns will whisper their familiar lies. Impermanence applies to healing too. Nothing stays fixed. Not the wound, not the medicine, not the person doing the healing. The mind-body connection that was screaming becomes a compass. Instead of ignoring tension, he learns to ask what it's communicating. Instead of powering through fatigue, he investigates what he's avoiding by staying busy. Mindfulness becomes practical, not mystical. Just the practice of checking in before checking out. Non-attachment stops being about not caring and becomes about caring without clinging, about holding things lightly enough that they can change without shattering you. He reads The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk and finally understands why his stomach clenched every time he said yes when he meant no. He starts therapy, not because he's broken, but because integration requires witnesses, guides, maps through territory that's easy to get lost in alone. The temple is being rebuilt, not back to what it was, but into something truer. The sword is still there, but now he knows. You don't master the blade through domination. You become its partner through respect. And somewhere in the practice of building this new foundation, he realizes the strangest thing. He's becoming less disciplined and more alive, less controlled and more free, less perfect and more real. The ruins weren't the end. They were the clearing. And what grows from cleared ground is always stronger than what was forced to grow in shade. You've walked through the collapse, faced the shadow, seen the mirror break. And now something's different. Not fixed, different. Because spiritual transformation doesn't end, it evolves. Enlightenment through pain isn't a destination you arrive at and stay. It's a practice, a returning, a constant choosing between the comfortable lie and the uncomfortable truth. Here's what matters now. The discipline that destroyed you hasn't disappeared. It's still there, waiting, but you get to decide what it serves. Does it serve the image or the truth? Does it build walls, or does it clear ground? Because Wu Wei, that effortless flow the Taoists speak of, it doesn't mean abandoning structure. It means letting structure emerge from awareness instead of fear. The psychology of pain teaches us something radical. Suffering isn't the problem. Resistance to suffering is. Every moment you spend pretending you're not struggling, you're adding weight. Every time you performance strength instead of admitting exhaustion, the mind-body connection tightens. Shadow work isn't something you complete and move past. It's something you return to, again and again, each time discovering another layer you weren't ready to see before. So right now, wherever you are, sitting, standing, lying down, notice what your body is holding. Notice the tension in your jaw, the tightness in your chest, the way you might be bracing against what comes next. That's not weakness, that's information. Meditation and suffering share the same instruction. Stop running. Just for a moment, just long enough to feel what's actually true instead of what you wish was true. Non-attachment begins here, not in letting go of everything, but in loosening your grip enough to breathe. The temple within is still being rebuilt. Karma and rebirth are still unfolding with every choice you make. Impermanence is still teaching the hardest lesson. Nothing you're clinging to will stay the same anyway, so why not release it with grace instead of desperation? Self-awareness doesn't make life easier, it makes it real. And real is what you've been starving for underneath all that performance. The inner stillness you're searching for? It's not silence. It's the sound of truth finally being spoken without apology. There are other paths like this ahead, other teachings waiting, other moments where you'll have to choose between comfort and clarity, because suffering and awakening aren't events, they're the rhythm of a life lived honestly. The discipline that sets you free is still discipline. It just serves a different master now.